Hi, Barry. It's so great to have you with us today to get your insights on crowdfunding and to share with our African Crowdfunding Association community. For the community, Barry is the co-founder and CEO of the Crowdfunding Center.com. He's also the author of the book New Routes to Funding, which was in fact crowdfunded on Indiegogo. Barry is considered one of the sort of best names in terms of crowdfunding, fintech in the UK, and he's been a big part of the regulatory reforming that's happened in the UK, which is exciting because the rest of the world can learn from that. Barry, your background is sort of psychology, engineering, systems design. How did you actually move from that? Well, first of all, did I get that right? And then how did you move from that? Give us a brief background on how did you actually get into crowdfunding?
Yeah, absolutely. First, Kevin, I should say, let me thank you for inviting me. I've been to Africa a number of times. I love Africa, and I'm desperately keen that Africa should start to reap some of the benefits that other places are reaping from crowdfunding. So I'm delighted that you've asked me. So you asked about my background. My background is I sort of started with a degree in psychology. Unexpected for someone in my position, I guess, who spent most of his career as a tech entrepreneur, although I did spend quite a big chunk doing what you might call prehistoric fintech, building systems for banks before the word fintech was coined. So about 10 years, 12 years doing that with banks and with telecom. And then my kind of second phase was that I had a groundbreaking health tech company here in the UK, did some game-changing things for our National Health Service here. But what got me into crowdfunding was around 2007, 8, and 9, when there was the big crash. The banks had crashed the economy, and we really needed to do something about this. And then we saw crowdfunding beginning to happen in the USA, and I was very excited about this. I've spent most of my career, either working at the leading edge and elsewhere observing the leading edge and looking at the potential and the way that humanity is successively interacting with the technology and each shaping the other. So I've been fascinated by that all of this time. And so when our regulator here, they were called the FSA, Financial Services Authority back then. They're now called the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority. It's the same thing under a different name. When they started to be they cut up rough, really. Some very muddying press releases going out about, how to protect yourself from crowdfunding, that sort of thing. I was writing at the time, still am, for a publication called Real Business and Business Owner and a few others. So I took up the issue and started really to say, look, there's huge promise here for the economy more generally, for entrepreneurs, and for creating new jobs. We ran up against a brick wall, and we kind of so what got me in was a lot of irrevocably was the conventional wisdom here at the time is, and probably is in Africa as well, it's all right for those crazy Americans. They'll put money into anything. It'll never work here. So being a bit of an empiricist, I said, let's find out. So we ran a campaign to run an event, and it was oversubscribed, and we overfunded. So we went, well, that myth's gone, and we sat around after the event, and we kind of looked at the regulatory situation and where we were, and we looked at one another and kept on saying, through the evening, someone's got to do something about this, because if no one does anything, this will just get rolled over. We'll miss on this for a generation at least. And we said it for long enough and vehemently enough. Eventually, one of us looked at the other and said, "Oh God." We went, "What?" It's us, isn't it? So that's what got me in. We ran the first Deep Impact conference as a result. That resulted almost immediately, within a very short period of time, in what now is the all-party parliamentary group on crowdfunding, which is still going on, and we still help facilitate and run.
Okay, so I mean, it sounds like your psychology degree might have helped you along the way, and maybe was part of what actually got you into it.
Well, there's a phrase that may or may not make it into the book. Psychology is the new technology. When I was kind of starting out with technology, part of the excitement was, all the different things that you could do with it. Now, you can do almost anything with it. And the limitations aren't really what you can do with the technology. The limitations are what people will like and accept. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, psychology is the new technology. And of course, the whole thrust of the book, the New Routes to Funding book, is understanding crowdfunding and the psychology that underpins that, in terms of we believe that particularly seed crowdfunding based on rewards crowdfunding is a new way for entrepreneurs and business people to relate to the rest of the world, a new kind of transaction. So yeah, it's kind of underneath all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we talk about crowdfunding campaigns, you've launched a few yourself, and I'm sure you've been privy to many different campaigns. Rewards, donations, equity, most being in the UK. From a preparation point of view, what would you say people should, how long should they prepare? What sort of plans should people have before they run a campaign?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. So yeah, you're right. We collect data on campaigns from around the world. And when I checked the numbers yesterday, we have data on 495,000 crowdfunds tracked end to end so far. So we see a lot of them. That number is purely for rewards-based crowdfunds.
Okay. Yeah.
We also collect data on equity crowdfunds, and we see a lot of them. And we've given a lot of thought to the process. One of the most interesting stats that we find, which is really consistent, is that 2 out of every 5 crowdfunds, nearly 40%, fail almost immediately. They never reach 1%. Okay. And it's not difficult to see why that might be. So typically, they don't understand the model. They believed one of the myths that you put something on the internet and people send you money, or they just didn't prepare.
Yeah.
So for a typical campaign, depending on how well prepared you are, it should probably be a minimum of 3 months. You can squeeze that a little bit if you're really, really well prepared. But don't try squeezing it if you're not. And if you're not reasonably well prepared, it should probably be longer. And what it's really governed by is, before you launch your campaign, you need your core audience to understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, and to be ready to back you. And that's the key success factor.
So ultimately what you're saying is you actually need to be building that crowd before the campaign launches.
Yeah, I mean, it's not too much of an exaggeration to say that most crowdfunds are won or lost before they press the go button.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I explain to people when I go out and help people with their campaigns on this side of the pond. And so it's really good to hear that, that is exactly, how it is all over. I mean, is that you really need to be prepared and have and build that crowd around you, and then people will come and add on as your crowd, as they see that you're doing well with your current crowd.
Exactly right. Your crowd, your home crowd, your core audience, your foundation backers, as we call them in the new Mint model, which is in the book, are your credibility. They're your credibility, and they're your best adverts as well.
Okay, yeah. And in terms of a campaign, how should someone decide how much to raise? Because you've got if the goal's really big, you might not reach it, but if it's too small, it might look insignificant. What do you think is the best way to decide that?
Yeah, there was a really good comment from a good friend of ours, Bill Morrow, is well known internationally and globally. He runs Angel's Den, which is fundamentally an angel network, but they also have a crowdfunding platform. And he said it's really interesting. Men tend to set the targets on the basis of ego. So it tends to be £100,000 or dollars, $250,000, $500,000 or $1 million. And as soon as he sees those figures, he knows how they've been set. And one of the differences, women tend to ask for what they need. Okay. And he joked that, it might be, $24,792.42. Well, I think he was exaggerating slightly, but, and the answer is, there's a reason that women, and we know this from the data, and we'll be publishing a report on this very soon, are more successful at crowdfunding than men. And part of that reason is they ask for what they need. So work out what you need, be honest, be transparent, and don't be pulled out of shape by bravado or ego, because it will work against you. You can, as you well know, Kevin, overfund. And, most successful crowdfunds do overfund. Yeah. So the clear advice is work out what you really need, to cover your costs, to get going. That's the basis for your target. Don't forget to factor in all your costs and so on as well, absolutely. And the money the platform will take, and the credit card companies and so on. But that fundamentally raise what you need, target what you need.
Target what you need, and like you said, I mean, you mentioned being transparent, essentially putting out on your campaign exactly what the money is being used for. Do you think that actually aids you in being successful, because people feel that you're being open and honest?
Yeah, what inspired the new Mint model I mentioned is some research that Ethan Mollick at Wharton School did, where he looked at the motivations of backers. And they're different for different groups of backers, but they're fundamentally, firstly, the people who know you are motivated by a desire to help you and support you, primarily, and secondarily by what it is that you're doing, and whether they're on board and interested in that and want to support that as well. The people that don't know you are going to be inspired, if they are at all, by the latter. It's a common vision. So the details of what you're going to do, how many of this or that you're going to buy and so on, are much less important than the vision and the sense of passion and the understanding of what you're trying to achieve, why you're trying to achieve it, and more importantly, from my point of view as a backer, of what that means to me. What's it for? What's this about?
Okay, so you essentially, I think, have sort of answered the next question I was going to ask, which was, could you narrow down what the important aspects are that make a campaign a success? Is there anything else that you think really just needs to be there, and without it, you really reduce the chances of success?
Yeah, there's one really key thing which has a number of outworkings. So the really key thing is to understand your audience and to talk to them in the right way. So the cardinal mistake we see all the time, even by really, really experienced business people, even experienced marketers, is the campaign that goes up that says, this is me, this is what I do, and I'm doing something really good, and goodbye. It's gone. We've lost you. Because it's me-centered. Okay,
Yes.
that's the cardinal mistake. So the converse of that, the thing to get absolutely right, is a laser focus on understanding your audience, your backers, why they would be interested in this, and coming to them, not expecting them to come to you by your appeal, and it is an appeal, should be. The Pebble Watch is a really good example of this. Hi, I'm Eric, and this is the Pebble Watch, and this is how great it is, and this is why you want it. Okay, so by default, the video is crucial to this, and the first 15, 20, maximum 25, 30 seconds of the video is crucial, because in there goes the reason why I'm going to take an interest and continue watching. And if you haven't got that laser focus on your audience, why they would be interested in you, and an ability and willingness to speak clearly to them in their own language, your chances diminish rapidly.
Okay, yeah. And yeah, I mean, in terms of major mistakes that certain campaigns are, make that makes them fail. I mean, I know you've mentioned me focused, and also the fact that people have this misconception that you can put something on the internet and people will flock to it. Are there any other mistakes to avoid that you think are out there?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about seed crowdfunding or rewards crowdfunding, you've got to make sure you got your price point right. So it's essential that price point should also work for your core audience.
Okay. Yes.
Okay. So you're going to need that foundation, those foundation backers in place. If the price point is beyond them, you're in trouble. So that's one. The other one is have a range of rewards. So something for everyone. So you want something that people who just like the look of it and want to say good luck with that, can buy into it at a low cost. A mug or a T-shirt or a thank you or whatever down at the low end, and you want something right at the high end as well for the people who for whom money is not a problem, who want something unique or to feel special or whatever. So there's a lot of creativity to go into that as well.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. If we look at Africa, in terms of crowdfunding, we are really sort of still in our infancy. Rewards crowdfunding is starting, and donations are starting to take shape. What role do you think, crowdfunding actually should play in an ecosystem? If you can focus on Africa, I know you're not from Africa, but so maybe if you can just explain what you think, where crowdfunding fits in the actual ecosystem, and relate that to the African sort of scenario.
Yeah, you're right. I'm not from Africa. I've declared myself as an Africa lover, but in fact, my partner Kay, who's in the next room, is from Africa. She grew up there, so I'm kind of I learn a lot by osmosis too. And what kind of ecosystem? I think it's got huge. Well, in fact, I know it's got huge potential. And I think the most relevant thing I can tell you here is that quite early on, I think about 3 years ago, we ran a survey across the USA, and we looked at crowdfunding in every state across the USA, using the data, and in 100 cities. And they, in terms of the way they were benefiting, varied wildly. Absolutely wildly. And so the top 3 or 4 hubs were just off the scale in terms of most everyone else. And you would probably guess most of them, New York, San Francisco, and perhaps surprisingly, Washington, D.C.
Okay.
And then the vast body, and then right to on the tail end of places like Mississippi. And we looked at that, and do you know what? The key difference is it worked best where it was most networked.
Okay.
Yeah. And that tells us, and we've got corroboration for this since, that as we become more networked online, the potential rises. So there's real hope for the Mississippis of this world, and the places, you know, that are out of the way. Lots of out of the way places in Africa, obviously, as well as some big cities.
Yeah.
So there's huge potential, and as we look at the data, as we monitor it, we actually see peaks and troughs. And when there's activity that creates or brings know-how to an area, the level of benefit goes up, and it can actually rise quite quickly. And depending on what the activity is, it can dissipate, not quite as quickly, but it can dissipate. But it's about the know-how and enabling people to understand. So in terms of building, the potential for Africa, I believe, is huge. It's a new kind of ecosystem. It's a new way of doing business that is people-friendly, and that isn't capital driven. It's people driven, and it's driven by innovation, and a kind of innovation that is people centered, you know. So I think it's a huge potential. In terms of how you get there or how you maximize the benefit of that, well, I think it's a lot about thinking about and understanding it as an ecosystem, and understanding the things that you can do to accelerate that.
Yeah. So what we see, what I've seen a lot of is that there's just consumers here do not even know about it. And so, I mean, why would you say it's important to actually spread the sort of crowdfunding idea, and you know, and what it's possible, you know, what is possible through crowdfunding?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you've got a number of different audiences anyway. You've got, you know, folks at home in the home country and in Africa, and then you've got folks outside there as well. What I can tell you is what's driven it here in the UK and in the USA and other places is press interest. So I don't know whether you've had that in Africa. But, you know, if not, then that's something that you could be looking at. And that could be a collective effort. So everyone benefits from that in finding the journalists who've got some interest, fostering that interest, and building the interest and the excitement of, you know, A, what's happening, and B, you know, the potential for the future.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in Africa, the diaspora essentially are a big portion of funding and the success of crowdfunding. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is quite interesting. So, you know, in the rest of the world, or much of the rest of the world anyway, you would normally expect your core audience to come from, you know, the people that you know locally and via work and so on. I suspect that's probably, I don't really know, but I suspect that's probably different. So the relationships that you have may well, the strongest ones or the most applicable ones anyway, may well be with people out there currently in another African country or even outside of Africa. So that if that's right, and I suspect it is, you know, the ability to foster those relationships, to inform those people, to understand the way that the rules change when you're crowdfunding, and they do, you know, in terms of how you can message people, what people expect, what people are happy and will happily accept. You know, they know it's a campaign. They know there's a build-up. They kind of, you know, if I was to send you a message every day normally, you'd soon get fed up with that. But if I do that well within the context of a campaign, it's perfectly normal.
Yeah.
So rules change. So I suspect that a place to start is to look at that diaspora and the way that works in terms of providing foundation backing and possibly even outreach from there.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's great. My next question just is looking into the future. I mean, what do you believe the impact's going to be in the next 10 years in terms of crowdfunding globally? And then, I mean, with a focus, your thoughts on Africa, but what is the next 10 years going to look like?
Yeah, I'm afraid the answer is it depends. So what does it depend on? Let's talk about two things. Let's talk about equity crowdfunding, investment crowdfunding, as separate from seed and rewards crowdfunding, because they're very different animals.
Absolutely.
As you well know. With the former, with the equity crowd and investment crowdfunding, the biggest factor there will be when are the regulators globally as well as in the UK. We've got a good reputation for this in the UK.
Yes.
I'd like to think more than a small part because of the pressure we were able to exert and the changes we were able to help bring about. But we're not there yet. We're certainly not there yet in terms of a full understanding of the impact of transparency and a different way of doing. Some fascinating research coming out from Professor Douglas Cummings, who I'm corresponding with over in Toronto. I think his research title is Untangling. It's untangling fraud from crowdfunding, and he shows the impact very clearly of transparency for the first time at that kind of research hard level, and that has not been factored in yet.
Yes,
it hasn't been factored in yet. What's been factored in here is the potential of innovation, and that's a great thing and a good thing, but it's only a start. So in America, they haven't even factored that in. It's a much earlier stage. I suspect that there's lots of vested interests that are, keeping a leash on things. Who knows where that will go? The potential for Africa is to leapfrog us both. Yeah.
Yes.
The potential for Africa is to take a long, hard look at the research and at our experience and say, great, okay, well, we can do this.
Yes.
So there's huge potential in terms of investment crowdfunding for Africa. In terms of seed crowdfunding on the rewards model, it's global by its nature. It doesn't know any boundaries. It doesn't, the regulation creates boundaries. It doesn't know any boundaries. And it seems to me that we are just at the point we've plateaued globally. I'm sure that's not the case in Africa, for the reasons we've been talking about. But globally, we've pretty much plateaued. And the reason for that is I think we've reached the end of the early adopter phase.
Okay. Yes.
And if that's right, and we've got a number of initiatives underway to explore that and do something about it, when we break into the next phase, the amount of benefit and activity could treble, and then after that, treble again. Okay. So we're talking about billions already. So the potential impact is great. And when we talk about those billions, one of the things I like to draw attention to is in equity crowdfunding, the numbers are bigger. Yeah. In seed crowdfunding, the numbers are smaller, but much, much more closely targeted. Yeah. So what do I mean by that? I mean, we all have this kind of numerical bias. I sometimes call it a numerical snobbery when I say it in some people. But we all have the bias when we think big numbers are more important. Yeah. But when Apple was being founded, they needed $1,300. And how they got it was that Steve Jobs sold his van, sold his calculator, and they got the $1,300. That was the seed money for Apple. And, seeds, apples, you get it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Exactly. So that bias, I mean, it really shouldn't be there. In terms of the one thing that I was trying to do, it's just come to mind now. There are some campaigns that unfortunately people, are not being able to offer what they promised due to mainly the extremely overfunded campaigns. How do you think the industry is going to sort of deal with that? People who are not getting, the reward that they backed. Are you noticing anything sort of sliding crowdfunding negative because of that, or the number of positive campaigns sort of trumps it?
Yeah, I think there's probably more that could be done, and there's probably more that we should be doing as an industry. In terms of keeping reasonable limits.
Yeah.
Maybe it's 20 times or 50 times the original target or whatever. Because as you say, when you get these runaway campaigns that fund massively, they can trigger problems. And usually it's management problems and overreach. I don't think there's an example of malfeasance that
absolutely.
But overall, again, there's some really good academic work being done on this, and there is a non-delivery rate, and it's about 9%.
Okay.
And we know, people know when they're pledging that it could take some time.
Yeah.
And there's likely to be an overrun as well. And people accept that, and then they know that there's a possibility of non-delivery, and it's genuinely part of the deal. However, it's not part of the deal for the entrepreneur. I'd really like to stress that it's incredibly important that if you're you deliver on your promise, and if you can't, it's really is because you can't.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So actually, thinking about that and making sure when you set up your campaign, if you are, one of your perks is that you have a discounted product, run the numbers so that you know when to stop and when to, have another perk where the discount isn't so high, for example.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, no, that's great. I thought I'd ask some more personal questions now, getting off crowdfunding a little bit. And just to find out what internet resource, so something like Slack or Evernote, do you actually love and use and think that the people who are going to watch this should know about and should think about using?
Yeah, a difficult question to answer because there's so many. But at the risk of shoveling a whole ton load in, I would say the Google suite of Google Docs and Sheets and Forms and so on. There's huge value in those, both as collaborative tools. But for example, one of the big needs when you're starting to get your campaign together is somewhere to collect people, is somewhere to garner that interest, and to be able to generate an email list and keep people in touch. And Google Forms can be really helpful with that, for example. Yeah. So in a word, Google. The Google Suite.
And if you could recommend one book, what would that be and why?
I presume I'm not allowed to mention mine at this point.
We can talk about that though.
We'll talk about that later. It's really difficult. I shot that question at my partner Kay, and we're both kind of stroking our beard. I think I would probably plump for The Art of Asking, by Amanda Palmer, because there's a huge amount of insight, wisdom, and knowledge there about fundamentally what you're doing when you're crowdfunding.
Yeah.
You know, and the kind of transaction, for want of a better word, that is going on there.
Okay. And so in terms of what you're doing now, what sort of new projects are you working on? Other than of course, your book is out there. You know, what are you working on at the moment?
Yeah, as you say, the mint model, which is, you know, going into the book, is really exciting for us because of the illumination that's bringing in. We're continuing to develop that. We've just had accredited we believe it's the world's first professional development course for business advisors, to help them, because they don't yet, to understand the different models of crowdfunding, who can use them and how they can be used, both in their own right and as stepping stones to other forms of funding. So that's very exciting. We're going to be at the Design Centre in London on Friday, working with something called the Knowledge Transfer Network. This is a government-supported agency to be running that course for the very first time. So it's really exciting.
That's very
and it's something that we're doing quietly. So I'm going to sort of mention this in hushed tones. But it's something that I think could have great potential for places like Africa. Is something called the Business Funding Accelerator, where we've taken a fresh look at what ordinary entrepreneurs need in order to get off the ground, in the context of seed crowdfunding, and created a whole new way to approach that as a virtual accelerator, using the virtues and properties and capabilities embedded in that. So we're very excited about that. Yeah. We're taking our first entrepreneurs through that right now. So we're refining that process. So it's really lots going on, and yeah, very exciting times.
That's really great. I mean, I know you're a very busy individual, but you know, if people did want to learn more about what you're doing, and not only you, but you and your team, and you know, how could they reach you? How can they reach out, learn? What can you share with us?
The easiest way to keep in touch with what I'm up to personally is I post frequently on LinkedIn. So you'll find me as Barry E. James fairly easily on LinkedIn, or if you search for Instigator, that's my handle there, and on Twitter as well. So that's connecting with me personally and keeping up with some of this stuff. Yeah. With the team and the stuff that we're doing, come and join us at the Crowdfunding Centre. You can spell out the American way or the British way, and you'll still get there. So that's thecrowdfundingcentre.com. Come and join. You can join for free. We'll send you daily or weekly updates. Or if you want to have a kind of more interactive experience, we also manage the world's biggest crowdfunding group on LinkedIn, which is Crowdsourcing and Crowdfunding for Entrepreneurs. Okay. So you'll find us in there as well.
Thanks very much. There's many different ways. Is there anything you'd like to, I mean, that comes to the end of what I had to ask. Is there any parting comments that you'd like to give to everybody who watches this?
Yeah, I'd just like to reinforce the huge potential there is here for Africa, especially, and for the world. So I would, we're in a time when of bots and of AI and of technology that are going to be taking over a lot of the things that we as human beings have spent our time on historically. And and the nature of work and the nature of jobs is changing. And we believe the answer to that is that there's this new economy, this new way of creating your own job and rolling your own role, and new way of being that is people-centered. So as entrepreneurs, I'd encourage you to get out there and create stuff that people want and need. And the people in the crowdfunding world, I would just urge you on, to work and carry on doing what you're doing, but to work together to create this ecosystem. That's how we create prosperity that can be shared, and that's how we make a better world.
Yeah, thank you so much, Barry. I mean, it really has been an amazing time chatting to you. I actually think I could sit and we could chat for, hours, on end, because there is so much to share and there is so much excitement, and it's so nice to see others out there with the same beliefs that this really is the way that we need to move into the future. So, I mean, a real big thank you, and I'm sure that we'll be in touch, going forward in terms of what we're trying to do at the African Crowdfunding Association. I know that you've put your hand up, and thank you very much to say, I believe in crowdfunding, and I really like Africa, and so thank you so much that you've offered that support when we need it. So it really was great to chat to you today, and all the best, and have a great day.
Not at all. Thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed it immensely. I love what you're doing. I love the principles that you're doing it to. Let me know how I can help more.
Great. Thanks so much, Barry. Cheers.
Bye.
If you are as excited about crowdfunding as we are, subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below.